On December 21, 1945, in Tokyo, Japan, General Douglas MacArthur sat inside his office in the Daiichi Assurance Building, the headquarters from which he directed the occupation and, in many ways, ruled a defeated nation. The war had ended, but the air around him was still thick with consequence. Policy decisions, military paperwork, political pressure, the careful rebuilding of a shattered empire. In the middle of that controlled routine, an aide entered with an urgent telegram forwarded from Europe. MacArthur took it, scanned it quickly, and for a split second the mask he usually wore, calm, distant, unreadable, shifted. It was subtle, but those close enough to notice would remember it. A flicker of surprise, maybe something closer to sadness. He placed the telegram on the desk as if the paper itself had suddenly gained weight. General George S. Patton, Jr. was dead. He had died that same day in a military hospital in Heidelberg, Germany, 12 days after a car accident that broke his neck and left him paralyzed. Patton had been 60 years old. He had survived 2 world wars, survived professional enemies, survived the politics that swallowed men whole, survived command decisions that should have destroyed him, survived the kind of exhaustion that ages soldiers faster than years ever could. He had driven armies across North Africa and Sicily, then through France and into Germany, becoming one of the most famous American generals of all time. Yet now he was gone, not killed by shell fire or ambushed in battle, not lost in the chaos of a front line, but taken by injuries from what many would later call a minor collision on a country road. The contrast was almost cruel. A man whose legend was built on violence and momentum brought down when the guns had already fallen silent. According to accounts from staff officers who were present, MacArthur remained quiet for several moments after taking in the news. Then, without drama, he began to draft a statement. And from that moment comes the story that matters here. What MacArthur said when Patton died, how he chose to memorialize him, and what that tribute revealed about MacArthur's idea of greatness in war. To understand why Patton's death struck MacArthur at all, you have to step backward and examine what their relationship actually was, and what it wasn't. Douglas MacArthur and George Patton were not close friends. Their greatest fame came in separate worlds during the Second World War, MacArthur in the Pacific, Patton in Europe. They did not share a headquarters, did not plan campaigns side by side, and did not exchange a steady stream of letters. Their lives ran like parallel lines, close enough to resemble each other, far enough that they rarely touched. Still, they knew each other, and they understood the kind of man the other one was. They had served in the same institution, risen through the same officer culture, breathed the same traditions, and carried the same sense that war was not simply a duty, but a calling. MacArthur was born in 1880. Patton was born in 1885. Both came from families steeped in military identity. MacArthur's father, Arthur MacArthur, Jr., had been a Civil War hero and a general. Patton's grandfather had been a Confederate colonel, and Patton's family treated military history like scripture. Both men went to West Point, though in different eras. MacArthur graduated in 1903, first in his class. Patton graduated in 1909 after an extra year caused by academic trouble. Even those details, MacArthur's effortless dominance, Patton's stubborn climb, hinted at the difference in their styles, and yet also the similarity in their ambition. Their first clearly documented connection came during the First World War, when both served in France in 1918. MacArthur commanded the 42nd Rainbow Division. Patton commanded tank units, helping shape what mechanized warfare might become. Records show they met at least once during that war, though the surviving accounts are thin and unsatisfying, the kind of historical footnote that leaves you wishing someone had written down what was said. After the war, their paths crossed again in the United States during the uneasy decades of the 1920s and 1930s. Both were rising officers in a peacetime army that often felt overlooked, underfunded, and forgotten by a country that wanted to move on. They encountered one another at military functions and in Washington, according to various accounts. Moments of recognition more than moments of friendship. But the most consequential intersection of their careers came in 1932, during the Bonus Army incident, an episode that would stain reputations and reveal how both men handled controversy. In that summer, veterans of the First World War gathered in Washington, D.C., camping and demanding early payment of bonuses they believed they were owed. The situation became politically explosive. President Herbert Hoover ordered the Army to clear the encampment. MacArthur, then the Army Chief of Staff, commanded the operation. Patton, at that time a major, led cavalry and tank elements involved in carrying out those orders. It was not a glorious campaign. It was not the sort of thing officers dreamed about when they studied Caesar and Napoleon. It was uncomfortable, unpopular, and morally complicated. Contemporary accounts describe Patton executing MacArthur's instructions without hesitation, doing what he believed the chain of command required. Years later, both men would remember the incident differently in tone and emphasis. But in that moment, Patton had served under MacArthur in a highly charged operation that would be debated for decades. After that, their trajectories separated again. MacArthur went to the Philippines to organize the Philippine Army. Patton remained in the United States, continuing his evolution from cavalry to armored warfare, preparing, perhaps without fully realizing it, for the kind of mobile fighting that would define him. During the Second World War, the two men became symbols of different halves of the American war effort. MacArthur's name became inseparable from the Pacific, the island campaigns, the promise to return, the dramatic public persona with the pipe and the sunglasses. Patton, in contrast, became the face of aggressive ground warfare in Europe, famous for his speed, his profanity, his confidence, and his ability to push men beyond what they thought they could do. They had minimal direct contact during the war. Available records suggest they exchanged few letters, if any. They watched each other from afar through communiques, newspaper reports, and the constant hum of military gossip. Yet even with distance between them, they shared a philosophy of war that was instantly recognizable to anyone who studied both. The belief that offense mattered, that momentum mattered, that boldness could break an enemy faster than caution ever could. Both men valued mobility, speed, and the psychological impact of relentless pressure. Both cultivated powerful personal images, MacArthur as the commanding statesman-warrior, Patton as the hard-driving battlefield commander with ivory-handled pistols and a voice that could shake a room. They also shared another trait. Controversies seemed to follow them like smoke. MacArthur clashed with civilian leadership and earned a reputation for being difficult, even dangerous, to manage. Patton created recurring problems for Eisenhower through impulsive remarks and actions. He slapped soldiers, embarrassed superiors, and occasionally spoke in ways that detonated politically. Each man, in his own theater, could win battles and also trigger headaches for those above him. By the time the war ended, their stories were not only about victory, but about the price of commanding men at that level, the constant collision between military brilliance and political reality. By December of 1945, the global conflict had ended, but the careers of these two generals were in very different places. MacArthur was the supreme commander for the Allied powers in Japan, effectively governing the nation during occupation and overseeing enormous reforms. Patton, meanwhile, had been placed in command of the 15th Army in Germany, a largely administrative assignment focused on documenting and studying the war. On paper, it was still a command, still a general's responsibility, but everyone understood it was not the command Patton wanted. His situation had become politically toxic after controversial remarks about former Nazis, including comparisons between Nazi Party membership and membership in political parties in the United States. Those comments caused outrage. Eisenhower had removed him from command of the Third Army in October of 1945, assigning him instead to the less prestigious 15th Army. Patton took the change hard. According to his diary entries from October and November of that year, he felt bitter and sidelined, convinced that his country no longer valued him. He was already thinking about returning home and retiring from active service. The war that had given his life meaning was over, and in peacetime, he seemed to be shrinking inside the very system he had helped save. Then came December 9th, 1945. Patton was riding in a car near Mannheim, Germany. According to the official accident report, the car collided at low speed with a U.S. Army truck. The crash itself did not look like history. It looked like bad luck. But the impact threw Patton forward, and he struck his head against a metal partition. The force broke his neck and severed his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. He was taken to a military hospital in Heidelberg. For 12 days he lay there, alive, conscious, aware, but unable to move. Medical records and the accounts of people around him describe a man who understood exactly what had happened, who grasped with painful clarity that his body had betrayed him when the battlefield no longer could. He had lived by motion, by attack, by speed, and now he was trapped inside stillness. On December 21st, 1945, at 5:50 p.m., Patton died. The cause was recorded as a pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. The man who had once seemed impossible to stop had been stopped completely. News traveled fast through military channels. According to various accounts, the telegram reached MacArthur in Tokyo on December 21st, or on December 22nd, Tokyo time, because of the time difference. Staff officers who later spoke about it described MacArthur receiving the message and reading it without immediate comment. Afterward, according to those same accounts, he asked to be left alone for a few minutes. In a place where everything was scheduled and controlled, that request mattered. It suggested the news had landed not as routine information, but as something personal. If not intimate, then at least deeply felt. After that brief pause, MacArthur called his staff back in and began dictating a statement about Patton's death. The tribute he issued was preserved in military archives and printed in newspapers, placing his words into the permanent public record. The official text was brief, formal, and measured, the kind of statement that could move through Washington without causing trouble. It read, "The death of General Patton is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. He was one of the most brilliant soldiers America has produced. His daring and resourcefulness were matched by his tactical skill and strategic vision. He was a great captain who will take his place in history with the finest field commanders of all time. It was polished, controlled, and unmistakably respectful. Yet accounts from those present suggest the words MacArthur spoke before settling on the final, concise text were longer and more revealing. Colonel Sidney Huff, an aide who later described the moment, claimed MacArthur said something along the lines that Patton was a warrior in the purest sense, that men like Patton are shaped for war and, in a way, fade when war ends. Huff's recollection paints MacArthur's reaction as more than professional courtesy. It frames Patton as a man whose natural environment was combat. a commander who could thrive when everything was on the line and struggle when the world demanded patience instead of attack. That idea was not necessarily an insult. In fact, it was a kind of recognition, because MacArthur himself carried a similar identity. He had lived for war, for command, for the feeling of shaping events with force and will. The peacetime army could feel like a cage to men built for movement and decision. When MacArthur's official statement was cabled back to Washington and released to the press, it appeared alongside tributes from other leaders. Eisenhower, Patton's wartime commander in Europe, issued a statement that included, "General Patton was one of the most brilliant soldiers of his time. His boldness, energy, and tactical genius were vital to Allied victory in Europe." General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, said, "General Patton's death is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. He was a combat leader without peer." President Harry Truman issued his own message. "The nation has lost one of its greatest soldiers. General Patton's service in 2 world wars demonstrated the highest traditions of American military leadership." In that chorus of respect, MacArthur's statement stood out, not because it was louder, but because it came from a man not known for giving unqualified praise easily. According to accounts associated with MacArthur's circle, especially those referenced by biographer William Manchester, who interviewed people who worked with MacArthur, MacArthur privately admired Patton's aggressive leadership and combat success. He regarded Patton as a kindred spirit in one crucial way. Both believed war required bold action, risk, and relentless pressure. MacArthur embodied those principles in the Pacific. Patton embodied them in Europe. In Patton, MacArthur saw another commander who understood that war was not solved by cautious committee, but by willpower and speed applied at the right moment. But those same sources also suggest MacArthur understood something else. Both men were difficult. Both had a habit of colliding with civilian leadership. Both could turn victory into political trouble with a sentence spoken at the wrong time. Both had been criticized, accused of pushing too far, stepping outside bounds, refusing to be managed the way the system wanted. MacArthur's willingness to call Patton one of the most brilliant soldiers America has produced carried weight precisely because MacArthur rarely elevated other generals so completely. He was confident in his own talent and could be dismissive of others. So when he offered that level of praise, it suggested genuine respect rather than mere courtesy. In the days after Patton's death, as more details became known, accounts suggest MacArthur was disturbed by the manner of it. According to Colonel Sidney Huff's recollection, MacArthur remarked on the tragedy that a warrior like Patton did not die in combat. That reaction fits the romantic view of soldiering that both men shared. The belief that the battlefield was the proper stage for a great captain's final act. A death in a peacetime accident felt wrong, not only because it was sudden, but because it denied the story the ending that legends are supposed to have. For men who thought in terms of history, legacy, and the drama of command, the randomness of that ending could feel almost unbearable. MacArthur did not attend Patton's funeral. Patton was buried on December 24, 1945, in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of his Third Army. MacArthur remained in Tokyo, consumed by occupation duties. The distance and the responsibilities made attendance unrealistic. According to available records, he did not send a personal representative, nor did he offer a personal tribute beyond the official statement. That absence, however, did not erase the meaning of his words. If anything, it reinforced what the record suggests about their relationship: respect, recognition, and a shared understanding of what war demanded, but not closeness. They were not companions. They were mirrors at a distance. In the years that followed, MacArthur occasionally spoke of Patton in speeches and interviews, consistently describing him as a great combat leader. In his memoir Reminiscences, published in 1964, MacArthur included a brief passage on Patton, writing, "George Patton was one of the great captains of war. His tactical brilliance and aggressive leadership contributed immeasurably to Allied victory in Europe." The tone matched the tribute from 1945, admiring, respectful, and still not intimate. History, at least in the surviving documentation, shows two men who recognized each other's power without ever becoming personally intertwined. They shared traits: boldness, aggression, showmanship, a romantic view of warfare, and they shared a reputation for controversy. But they fought in different spheres and rarely touched directly. So when we ask what MacArthur said when Patton died, the public record gives us a statement that is both straightforward and loaded with meaning. The death of General Patton is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. He was one of the most brilliant soldiers America has produced. Those lines, preserved in archives and printed in newspapers, show MacArthur honoring Patton in the formal language expected of a senior commander. Yet, the reported private comments, Patton as a warrior born for war, a man whose natural place was the battlefield, a tragedy that he did not die in combat, add a shadow behind the official tribute. They suggest MacArthur felt Patton's death as the passing of a certain type of general, the relentless attacker, the battlefield commander who thrives in danger, but struggles when the world demands restraint. There is another layer, too, one that makes the story feel even more ominous in hindsight. MacArthur's own career would eventually echo parts of Patton's. Like Patton, MacArthur was a combat leader who clashed with civilian authority. Like Patton, he would become the subject of controversy that could not be contained by medals or victories. In 1951, President Truman would remove MacArthur from command during the Korean War for insubordination. Whether MacArthur consciously saw Patton's fate as a preview of his own is impossible to prove. The historical record does not provide us with MacArthur's private diary entries on that point. But the parallel is there, and it hangs over the story like a quiet warning. Two warriors, brilliant in battle, difficult in peace, too large to fit comfortably inside the boundaries civilian leadership tried to draw around them. In the end, what survives is incomplete, because most private reactions do not leave clean paperwork behind. We have MacArthur's official tribute. We have a few reported comments from those near him. We have later biographical accounts and the brief passage from his memoir. And from those pieces, we can say this with confidence. MacArthur recognized Patton as a soldier of rare quality. He placed him among the finest commanders in history. And coming from MacArthur, a man not generous with praise, that recognition carried extraordinary significance. It elevated Patton not merely as a successful general of the last war, but as a great captain meant to stand alongside the most celebrated field commanders of all time. For two men who cared intensely about legacy, reputation, and how history would remember them, that mattered. MacArthur's tribute did not describe a friendship. It did not paint Patton as a companion. It did something else. It granted Patton a permanent place in the language of greatness. MacArthur was, in effect, declaring that Patton had achieved what both men pursued, a kind of immortality in the profession of arms, a name that would outlast the politics and the scandals and the peacetime frustrations. That is what MacArthur said when Patton died. Words that framed Patton as brilliant, daring, resourceful, tactically gifted, strategically minded, and worthy of a place among the finest commanders in history. And if there was an unspoken message beneath the formal tribute, it was this: when the fighting ends, some men do not simply return to normal life. Some men, like Patton, seem built for war itself. And when war is gone, something essential in them goes with it. This video presents historical events based on documented records, including MacArthur's official statement, preserved in military archives and newspapers, accounts from staff officers, memoirs, and contemporary news reports. Historical interpretations may vary among historians and scholars. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple sources when studying this period of military history. This content is intended for educational purposes